Waverly Park was a quiet place where time seemed to move slower. The crisp autumn wind rustled the golden leaves scattered across the ground as a few people strolled peacefully. On one of the iron benches, an elderly woman with silver hair, Eudora Whitmore, sat still, clutching a dark leather purse tightly in her lap. Her distant gaze and rigid posture made her a quiet yet peculiar presence. She was always there, in the same spot, never speaking to anyone. Not far away, Officer Edgar Holloway was patrolling the park with his K-9 partner, a German shepherd named Orion. Orion was highly trained, capable of detecting drugs, explosives, and even human remains. Suddenly, the dog jerked his leash forcefully, letting out a deep growl. His fur bristled, and his sharp eyes locked onto a single target, Eudora and her purse. Edgar felt the strong pull and immediately tensed. Orion never reacted this way without reason. The officer approached cautiously. As they got closer, Orion began barking wildly, straining against his leash. Eudora, previously motionless, tightened her grip on her purse, holding it as if it contained something precious or dangerous. Edgar noticed the subtle tremor in her fingers. Something was definitely off. "Ma'am, may I ask you something?" Edgar said, keeping his tone calm yet firm. The old woman slowly lifted her eyes and forced a weak smile. "Of course, officer. Is there a problem?" Her voice was raspy, barely above a whisper. But Orion remained on high alert, fixated on the purse. "My dog seems very interested in your bag. Would you mind opening it?" Edgar asked, watching her closely. That's when Eudora's entire demeanor changed. Her eyes widened, and she abruptly tried to stand up. But Orion wasn't about to let that happen. The tension in Waverly Park was palpable. The once peaceful afternoon had shifted into something far more unsettling. People who had been minding their own business, reading on benches, scrolling through their phones, or simply enjoying the crisp autumn air, were now turning their heads toward the commotion. Orion's relentless barking had drawn attention, and whispers began to spread among the onlookers. Officer Edgar Holloway didn't like where this was going. His years in law enforcement had taught him one thing. When a K-9 reacted this strongly, something was very, very wrong. Orion was a trained professional, and his instincts were rarely, if ever, mistaken. Standing before him, Eudora Whitmore seemed frozen for a split second, her fingers tightening around the straps of her purse. Her face, previously unreadable, was now an open book of fear. Her hands trembled. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, rapid breaths. Then, without a word, she suddenly pushed herself off the bench, attempting to walk away. "Ma'am, I need you to stop," Edgar said firmly, stepping into her path. Eudora paused but didn't meet his eyes. I have to go," she muttered, clutching the purse even closer to her chest. Her voice cracked as she spoke. Orion lunged forward, barking even louder, his body straining against the leash. His instincts were in overdrive. Edgar had never seen him so determined. A nervous murmur rippled through the small crowd gathering nearby. People didn't often see a police dog react this way, and many were now watching with morbid curiosity. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to open your purse," Edgar repeated, his voice calm but authoritative. His hand hovered near his belt, ready to act if necessary. Eudora hesitated. She took a shaky step back. "There's no need for this, officer. It's just my belongings. Old letters, medication, nothing important," she insisted. Edgar narrowed his eyes. She was lying. He had questioned enough people in his career to recognize the signs: avoiding eye contact, shaky hands, defensive posture. And then there was Orion. The dog's reaction was proof that there was something inside that bag that shouldn't be there. "Then you won't mind showing me," Edgar said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Eudora gripped the bag tighter. Her knuckles turned white. Beads of sweat began forming on her forehead despite the chilly air. She looked around, as if calculating her options. And then, she made a run for it. The crowd gasped as the old woman bolted toward the walking trail, moving faster than anyone would have expected for her age. "Stop! Police!" Edgar shouted as he took off after her. But Orion was faster. With one powerful leap, the dog broke free from Edgar's grip, racing after Eudora with unmatched speed. The leaves crunched beneath his paws as he closed the distance. And before she could get far, Orion lunged forward and clamped his teeth onto the fabric of her coat, yanking her off balance. Eudora stumbled forward with a startled cry. Her purse slipped from her grasp and hit the ground with a muffled thud. Edgar caught up within seconds, grabbing hold of her wrist as she struggled. "That was a big mistake, ma'am," he muttered, steadying her as she panted in exhaustion. But his attention quickly shifted. The purse, Orion was sniffing it aggressively, pawing at it, growling low and deep. The officer bent down and slowly unzipped it. And what he saw inside made his blood run cold. Edgar's hands were steady, but his heart pounded as he pulled the zipper open. Orion stood rigid, his deep growl vibrating through the air, his nose inches away from the bag's opening. The small crowd that had gathered around them leaned in, waiting. The moment the officer peeled back the leather flap, a sickening stench hit his nostrils. It was faint but unmistakable, the scent of decay. Inside the purse, wrapped in an old faded cloth, was something small, something pale. Edgar hesitated for a moment before pulling back the fabric. The collective gasps from the onlookers confirmed what his gut had already told him. Nestled within the folds of the cloth was a tiny skeletal hand, its brittle fingers curled inward as if frozen in time. The bones were aged, yellowed, fragile. He had seen enough crime scenes to recognize human remains when he saw them. Eudora let out a strangled sob, her knees giving out as she collapsed onto the damp earth. Her body shook violently, and she covered her face with her trembling hands. "It wasn't supposed to be found," she whispered through broken breaths. Edgar's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a crime, this was a secret buried for decades. He exchanged a glance with Orion, whose rigid posture showed he was still on high alert. Whatever was happening, it wasn't over yet. The spectators whispered in shock, some stepping back as if the horror could reach them. A woman gasped, covering her mouth, while a man muttered, "Dear God!" Edgar immediately reached for his radio. "Dispatch, I need backup at Waverly Park. Possible human remains recovered. Suspect in custody." His voice was calm, but inside, his thoughts raced. Who did these bones belong to? How long had they been hidden? And why was Eudora carrying them? Eudora's sobs grew softer, but her hands remained over her face. "I didn't kill anyone," she whispered, rocking slightly. "I didn't. I swear I didn't." Edgar studied her carefully. The raw grief in her voice was real, but the situation was far from clear. If she hadn't killed anyone, then why was she running? And why was she carrying a child's remains in her purse? Orion suddenly let out a low whine, his ears twitching. Edgar followed the dog's gaze toward Eudora's trembling hands. Her fingers, once tightly clenched, had started to loosen, and her gaze had shifted, not to the bones, but to something beyond them. Edgar followed her line of sight and felt a chill crawl down his spine. Someone else was watching. Edgar's pulse pounded as his eyes darted toward the spot where Eudora had been staring. Across the park, near a cluster of trees, a figure stood motionless in the shadows. It was hard to make out details, but the stance was unnerving, rigid, deliberate, as if they had been there for a while. The moment Edgar locked eyes with them, they turned sharply and disappeared into the trees. His instincts kicked in. Whoever that was, they had been watching this unfold. Orion let out a sharp bark, his ears pricked forward, every muscle in his body tense. Edgar reacted immediately. "Stay with her," he ordered the bystanders, tightening his grip on the leash as he took off toward the tree line. The crisp autumn leaves crunched beneath his boots as he ran, Orion bounding ahead, leading the way. The figure was fast, weaving through the trees with practiced ease. Whoever they were, they didn't want to be caught. Branches scraped against Edgar's arms as he pushed forward, trying to keep up. Orion was gaining, his powerful legs propelling him forward like a predator chasing prey. Then, suddenly, silence. The figure was gone. Edgar slowed to a stop, breathing hard, scanning the area. There was nothing but rustling leaves and the distant hum of the city beyond the park. No footprints. No movement. Just emptiness. It was as if the person had vanished into thin air. A deep growl from Orion pulled Edgar's attention downward. The dog was fixated on something at the base of a tree. Edgar followed his gaze and felt a chill creep down his spine. A small, old-fashioned silver locket lay half-buried in the dirt, its chain broken. He knelt and carefully picked it up, flipping it open with his gloved fingers. Inside, there was a black-and-white photo of a little girl, her face eerily similar to a much younger Eudora Whitmore. His stomach tightened. This wasn't a coincidence. Edgar turned the locket over, his fingers brushing against a barely visible engraving on the back. A date. October 12, 1956. His chest tightened. That was over 60 years ago. He looked back toward the park, where Eudora still sat trembling, her hands covering her mouth. If this locket belonged to her, then what was it doing out here? And more importantly, who had dropped it? His radio crackled to life. Officer Holloway, status update? Edgar swallowed hard, gripping the locket tightly. Something much bigger was at play here. He glanced back toward the silent trees one last time before responding, his voice steady. I think we just uncovered something far worse than we expected. Edgar turned the locket over in his hand again, his mind racing. The date, October 12, 1956, wasn't random. It had to mean something. His gut told him that whoever had been watching from the trees had left it behind on purpose. But why? Was it a warning? A message? He needed answers, and there was only one person who could give them to him. Eudora Whitmore. He hurried back to the bench where she sat, still trembling, her thin fingers gripping the fabric of her coat. The crowd had mostly dispersed, but a few bystanders lingered, whispering among themselves. Orion trotted beside Edgar, his tail low, ears still alert. The dog could feel it too, the tension, the weight of something deeply wrong. Edgar stopped in front of Eudora and held up the locket. Do you recognize this? Eudora's breath hitched the moment she saw it. Her entire body stiffened. Her eyes, wide with a mixture of shock and something deeper, fear, locked onto the small silver pendant as if it were a ghost from her past. Slowly, her lips parted, but no words came out. Edgar crouched in front of her, his voice firm but measured. Ma'am, I need you to tell me what's going on. Who is this girl? He pointed to the faded photo inside. And what does this date mean? For a long moment, Eudora didn't move. Then, with a shuddering breath, she whispered, her name was Lillian. The way she said it, so soft, so fragile, sent a chill through Edgar's spine. He exchanged a glance with Orion, whose steady gaze never left Eudora's face. The old woman swallowed hard, then added, she was my sister. Edgar felt a weight settle in his chest. A sister. That changed everything. He had been expecting a daughter, maybe even a lost child, but a sister? That meant this story stretched even further back than he thought. He opened his notepad, his pen poised. What happened to her? He asked, his tone gentler now. Eudora's fingers clenched, her shoulders trembling. She disappeared. Her voice cracked. 65 years ago. Silence hung between them. The sounds of the park, distant laughter, the rustling wind, felt disconnected from the weight of her words. Edgar's jaw tightened. 65 years. That wasn't just a case of missing persons. That was a lifetime of secrets. And yet, somehow, those secrets had just resurfaced, in the form of a tiny skeletal hand in Eudora's purse. Edgar felt the weight of Eudora's words settle in his chest like a stone. 65 years ago. That meant this wasn't just a case of concealed remains, it was a forgotten crime, buried in time. His grip on the notepad tightened as he met Eudora's tearful gaze. "Tell me everything you remember," he urged, keeping his voice steady. "Start from the beginning." Orion shifted beside him, his ears twitching as if he, too, was listening. Eudora inhaled shakily, her frail hands twisting in her lap. "It was a Sunday," she murmured, her voice distant. "October 12, 1956. Lillian had just turned 7. Her lips trembled as she spoke. "Mama sent us to the store, just a few blocks away. We held hands the whole way. She was so small, so full of life." She paused, her expression darkening. "But on the way back, we took a shortcut through the woods." Her breath caught. "And that was the last time I ever saw her." A cold sensation crawled up Edgar's spine. "She disappeared in the woods?" he asked, glancing toward the tree line where the mysterious figure had stood earlier. Something about this didn't feel like coincidence. Eudora nodded stiffly, her fingers clenching around the fabric of her coat. "I ran home screaming. They searched for weeks, months. But there was no trace of her. No footprints. No torn fabric. Nothing." A tear slipped down her cheek. It was like she just vanished. The way she said it sent a chill through Edgar. He had seen plenty of missing persons cases in his career, but children didn't just vanish without a trace, especially not in broad daylight. He studied her carefully. "And the bones?" he asked, glancing at the purse. "How did you get them?" At that, Eudora closed her eyes as if pained by the memory. "They came to me," she whispered. 2 weeks ago. In the mail." Edgar's breath hitched. "The remains were delivered to her? You're saying someone sent you human bones after 65 years? He pressed, his mind racing. "Who would do something like that? And why now?" Eudora gave a hollow nod. "No return address. No note. Just the bones. And this." Her trembling hand reached into her coat pocket, pulling out something small. Edgar's pulse quickened when he saw it. A second locket, identical to the one found in the woods. A wave of unease settled over him. Someone wanted this to be found. Someone who had been watching. Someone who knew the truth. Edgar exchanged a glance with Orion before looking back at Eudora. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said slowly, "I think your sister's disappearance was never an accident, and whoever took her isn't done with you yet." Edgar stared at the identical locket resting in Eudora's trembling palm. The metal was worn, its surface scratched by time, but the weight of its significance was undeniable. His fingers tightened around his notepad as his mind raced. Someone had sent her this, along with the bones. Someone who wanted her to remember. "Did you open it?" he asked cautiously. Eudora hesitated before giving a slow nod. She turned the locket over, her frail fingers struggling with the tiny clasp. With a soft click, it sprang open, revealing a photograph inside, another black and white image of Lillian. But this one was different. It wasn't the same innocent picture as before. The girl in this photo looked older. Not 7 years old, but maybe 8 or 9. Edgar's heart pounded. "This picture, it's from after she disappeared," he murmured. "Lillian was alive." Eudora let out a soft sob, pressing the locket to her chest. "I knew it," she whispered. "I always felt it. I told them she wasn't dead." Her body shook with the weight of decades of doubt and grief. Edgar exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening. This changed everything. Lillian hadn't just vanished. Someone had taken her. Someone had kept her alive for years. But why return the bones now? Why send the lockets? His instincts screamed that this wasn't over. Orion let out a low growl, his ears pricking up. Edgar followed the dog's gaze toward the line of trees again. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, dark shadows over the park. His skin prickled with unease. Whoever had been watching them earlier could still be out there. He turned back to Eudora. "We need to get you somewhere safe," he said firmly. "Whoever sent you this, they're playing a game. And we don't know the rules yet." Eudora wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, nodding weakly. Edgar reached for his radio, calling for backup. The weight of the case pressed down on him, 65 years of secrets unraveling piece by piece. Someone had taken Lillian. Someone had hidden her away. And now, after all this time, they wanted Eudora to know. But why now? What had changed after all these years? He had a gut feeling that the real horror was yet to come. As the radio crackled with a response, Edgar turned toward his car, guiding Eudora with him. Orion followed closely, his body tense. Somewhere in the growing darkness, someone was still watching. And Edgar had the sickening realization that they weren't just uncovering the past. They were walking straight into a trap. The sun had dipped lower, casting deep shadows across Waverly Park as Edgar led Eudora toward his patrol car. The evening air was crisp, but a chill ran deeper through him, the kind that came from knowing someone was still out there, watching. Orion stayed close, his body tense, ears twitching at every distant rustle. Edgar's instincts screamed that something was wrong. He had spent years tracking criminals, but this time it felt like he was the one being hunted. As he opened the car door for Eudora, his radio crackled. "Officer Holloway, we got your request for backup, but there's a problem." Edgar frowned, gripping the device. What kind of problem? Static buzzed for a moment before the dispatcher's voice returned, lower, almost hesitant. "The security cameras in the area went offline 20 minutes ago. Every single one." His grip on the radio tightened. That was no coincidence. Someone was covering their tracks. Orion suddenly let out a sharp bark, his body lunging toward the tree line. Edgar followed his gaze and caught a glimpse of movement, just for a second. A dark figure slipping through the trees, too far to make out details. His pulse spiked. "Stay in the car," he told Eudora firmly, shutting the door before breaking into a run. Orion dashed ahead, his powerful legs propelling him toward the woods. Whoever this was, they weren't going to escape again. Leaves crunched beneath his boots as he sprinted between the towering trees, his flashlight cutting through the dimming light. Orion was just ahead, sniffing the ground, weaving through the underbrush with laser focus. Then, suddenly, nothing. The dog stopped dead, his head snapping side to side, nostrils flaring. Edgar caught up, his own breath heavy. The trail had vanished. No footprints. No sound. Whoever it was, they were gone. Edgar's jaw clenched as he scanned the dark woods. Someone had been here, watching, waiting. But how had they disappeared so quickly? He had chased enough criminals to know that no one vanished into thin air. Unless they knew exactly what they were doing. A sinking feeling settled in his stomach. This wasn't just about the past. It was happening now. And they were being toyed with. Slowly, he turned back toward the patrol car, his mind racing. If someone had been here all along, watching Eudora, tracking his every move, then this wasn't just a game. This was a warning. And the real nightmare was just beginning. Edgar's pulse was still racing as he made his way back to the patrol car. Orion kept glancing over his shoulder, ears twitching, sensing something Edgar couldn't see. The trees behind them stood silent, but the weight of unseen eyes still lingered. Someone had been here, right here. And yet, Just like before, they had slipped away without a trace. It was impossible. No one disappeared that easily. As he neared the edge of the woods, something caught his eye. Just off the path, on the rough bark of an old oak, there was a marking, deep, deliberate, freshly carved. He stepped closer, his flashlight casting an eerie glow over the grooves. A symbol. 2 intersecting circles, with a jagged line cutting through them. It wasn't random. It meant something. And Edgar had the sinking feeling that he'd seen it before. He snapped a photo of the marking before heading back to the car. Eudora sat inside, clutching the second locket tightly, her face pale. She looked up as he opened the door. "We need to go," Edgar said, his voice firm but calm. "I don't think we're alone out here." Eudora swallowed hard, her fingers trembling over the locket. "You found something, didn't you?" she whispered. Edgar hesitated. A symbol, carved into a tree near where they disappeared. Her expression changed, not just fear. Recognition. Edgar noticed it instantly. "You've seen it before," he pressed. Eudora's lips quivered, her gaze distant. "When I was a girl," she murmured. "After Lillian vanished, the police found that symbol painted on our front door. My mother scrubbed it off, but I never forgot." Her breath hitched. "And a week later, they closed the case. Said she was gone for good." A cold shiver ran down Edgar's spine. This wasn't just a missing persons case. It was something bigger. Orion whined softly from the front seat, his nose pressed against the window. Edgar followed his gaze. Back to the woods, back to the darkness beyond the trees. The pieces were fitting together in ways he didn't like. Someone had marked their presence, just like before. The same symbol. The same silence. The same vanishing act. If the past was repeating itself, that meant one thing. Whoever had taken Lillian all those years ago was still watching. Edgar started the engine, his grip tightening on the wheel. He wasn't just trying to solve a cold case anymore. He was stepping straight into a game that had been set in motion decades ago. And this time, whoever was behind it was waiting for him to play. The drive back to the station was eerily silent. Eudora clutched the locket tightly, her gaze fixed on the darkness outside, as if expecting to see something, or someone, lurking in the shadows. Orion sat in the passenger seat, his ears twitching at every passing streetlight. Edgar's mind raced. The symbol carved into the tree. The identical lockets. The fact that the police back then had given up so quickly. It all pointed to something much deeper than just a cold case. As he pulled into the station lot, Edgar made a decision. He needed to go back to the archives, back to the old files buried in storage. If there was a cover-up, it had to be there. "Stay in the car," he told Eudora. "I'll be right back." She didn't argue. She simply nodded, gripping the locket so hard her knuckles turned white. Edgar stepped out, glancing around. The street was quiet, but the uneasy feeling in his gut hadn't gone away. Inside, the station was dimly lit, most officers gone for the night. Edgar made his way down to the records room, a place where decades of unsolved cases gathered dust. He flipped on the lights and ran his fingers along the labeled drawers. 1956. The year Lillian vanished. He pulled out the file marked with her name. But the moment he opened it, his stomach dropped. There was barely anything inside. A single report page, incomplete. No witness statements. No search records. Just a single line at the bottom. Case closed. No further investigation required. His jaw tightened. Someone had erased the details. Someone powerful enough to bury a child's disappearance. He rifled through other cases from the same year, and that's when he noticed something chilling. Lillian Whitmore wasn't the only child who had gone missing that fall. There were at least 3 others, all within a 2-month span. All cases closed. all with the same vague explanation. Edgar felt his pulse quicken. This wasn't just about Lillian. It was bigger. Much bigger. A creak sounded from the hallway. Edgar stiffened, his hand instinctively moving to his holster. He listened. Soft footsteps, slow, deliberate. Someone was out there. He turned off the light and stayed still, his breath controlled. Through the gap in the door, a shadow moved past. It lingered for just a moment, then disappeared down the hall. Edgar exhaled slowly. Someone didn't want him looking into this. Carefully, he tucked the files under his arm and stepped out, his heart pounding. Orion was waiting in the car, alert. Eudora's eyes met his as he slid into the driver's seat. "Did you find anything?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Edgar started the car, scanning the street before answering. "I found proof that Lillian wasn't the only one." He looked into the rearview mirror, but the only thing staring back was the empty road. For now. The silence inside the car was suffocating. Eudora clutched her coat tightly, her knuckles white as Edgar's words sank in. More children had gone missing. More families had been left with no answers. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and for a moment, Edgar feared she might break down completely. "Who were they?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Edgar kept his eyes on the road. 3 other kids. All between 6 and 8 years old. All disappeared within weeks of each other. Eudora swallowed hard. But why wasn't it in the news? Why didn't anyone talk about it? Edgar's jaw tightened. That was the question that haunted him too. A case like this, a pattern of missing children, should have shaken the entire town. There should have been reports, headlines, desperate searches. Instead, the files had been gutted, and the town had moved on as if nothing had happened. "Someone made sure no one ever found out," he muttered. "Someone powerful." Orion let out a low growl from the front seat, his ears twitching. Edgar's grip on the wheel tightened as his gut twisted. That feeling again. The one that had been nagging at him since the park. The sense that someone was following them. He flicked his gaze to the rearview mirror. A pair of headlights glowed in the distance, trailing them at an unsettlingly steady pace. He exhaled sharply. "We're not alone," he muttered. Eudora tensed. "Are they following us?" Edgar didn't answer. Instead, he turned sharply onto a side road, watching carefully as the headlights behind them mirrored his movement. His pulse quickened. This wasn't just paranoia. Someone was tracking their every move. He didn't know if it was the same person from the park, but he wasn't about to take chances. "Hold on," he said, accelerating. Orion barked sharply as the car picked up speed. The headlights behind them did the same. The quiet road blurred past them as Edgar weaved through the empty streets. But no matter how many turns he took, the car behind them stayed close, refusing to fall back. Whoever was behind the wheel wasn't just tailing them, they were waiting for something. Then, without warning, the headlights cut off. Edgar's heart slammed against his ribs. He looked back. Nothing. The road was empty. The car had vanished. A deep unease settled in his chest. This wasn't over. Someone was sending a message. They knew Edgar was looking into the case, and they wanted him to know they were watching. He exhaled, gripping the wheel harder. "We're running out of time," he muttered. Eudora's eyes were wide with fear. "What do we do now?" Edgar didn't hesitate. "We find out who covered this up. And we find them before they find us." Edgar kept his grip firm on the wheel, his mind racing. The car had vanished too easily. No tire marks, no sign of where it had gone. It was as if it had never been there at all. But Edgar knew better. Someone was making sure they stayed one step ahead. The only question was, how far were they willing to go? Orion shifted uneasily in the front seat, his sharp eyes scanning the road as if expecting the headlights to reappear. Eudora's breathing was uneven, her hands gripping the locket against her chest. "Who are they?" she whispered. Edgar didn't answer right away. He didn't know yet. But he had a feeling the answer was buried deep in the files someone had tried so hard to erase. "We're going back to the station," he said. "I need to dig deeper." Eudora hesitated before nodding. She knew as well as he did, this wasn't just about the past anymore. It was happening now. When they arrived, the station was quieter than before, the halls dimly lit. Edgar led Eudora inside, locking the door behind them. Something about the silence felt wrong. He moved quickly toward the records room, Orion close at his side. The old case files still sat where he had left them, and Edgar wasted no time flipping through the pages. If someone had erased the details, there had to be a mistake somewhere. A name. A clue. Something. And then he found it. Hidden in the corner of one of the oldest reports, barely legible, was a mention of a detective assigned to Lillian's case. Howard Graves. Edgar frowned. The name didn't sound familiar, but something about it nagged at him. He turned to the department's personnel files, searching for Graves' records. Nothing. Not a single document. It was as if the man had never existed. His pulse quickened. Someone had erased him, too. He glanced at Eudora, whose hands trembled as she stared at the faded report. "I remember that name," she whispered. "He came to our house once. He asked questions. My mother told me never to speak of him again." Edgar exchanged a tense look with Orion before turning back to the file. If Howard Graves had been erased from the records, it meant one thing: he had known too much. The radio on Edgar's hip suddenly crackled to life, making Eudora flinch. "All units, report of a disturbance at Waverly Park. Possible suspicious activity near the woods." Edgar stiffened. His blood ran cold. Someone was back at the crime scene. He didn't hesitate. Snapping the file shut, he met Eudora's fearful gaze. "Stay here. Lock the doors." Then, turning to Orion, he gave a single command, "Let's go." Edgar's tires screeched against the pavement as he sped toward Waverly Park. The radio call hadn't given details, but he already knew whoever had been watching them wasn't done. Orion sat alert in the passenger seat, his deep brown eyes locked on the road ahead. The night air outside was heavy, thick with the kind of tension Edgar could feel in his bones. This wasn't just a disturbance. This was a message. As he pulled up near the entrance, the flashing lights of a lone patrol car illuminated the darkened park. A young officer stood by the vehicle, his face pale. "Holloway," he called out as Edgar stepped out, Orion close behind. "We got a call about movement in the woods, but when I got here, there was no one." Edgar's jaw tightened. It was the same pattern. Someone was always just ahead, watching, waiting, disappearing. But this time, he was done chasing shadows. He turned toward the tree line, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The ground was damp, the scent of wet leaves thick in the air. Orion sniffed at the dirt, his tail stiff, his body low, tracking something. Edgar followed him deeper into the woods, every step cautious. The silence felt unnatural. Too quiet. Too still. And then Orion stopped. His ears perked, his nose pointing toward something just ahead. Edgar's pulse pounded as he stepped closer. There, nailed to the bark of an old oak, was a faded photograph. His breath caught as he peeled it off, the edges brittle with age. It was a picture of Lillian Whitmore. Not the one from the missing persons file. This was different. Older. She looked to be about 10, staring directly at the camera with hollow, distant eyes. A chill crawled up Edgar's spine. She had been alive years after her disappearance. He turned the photo over, his breath catching at the writing scrawled on the back. Do you see now? The ink was faded, smeared in places, but the message was clear. Someone had left this for him to find. He swallowed hard, his grip tightening on the photo. This wasn't just a warning, it was proof. Proof that Lillian's disappearance wasn't an accident. Proof that someone had been pulling the strings for decades. A branch snapped behind him. Edgar spun, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun. But the woods were still. Empty. Yet he knew he wasn't alone. Somewhere in the darkness, someone was there, watching. Orion let out a low growl, his body tense. Edgar exhaled slowly, then turned back toward the car. He had what he needed. Now, he just had to figure out who was leading him down this path, and why. Edgar gripped the old photograph tightly as he stepped out of the woods. The cold air bit at his skin, but the chill running down his spine had nothing to do with the weather. He had spent years solving cases, uncovering secrets that people wanted buried, but this was different. This was personal. Someone had placed this here for him to find. Someone who knew he wouldn't stop digging. And they wanted him to see the truth. Orion jumped into the car first, his ears still perked, his body tense. Edgar slid into the driver's seat and tossed the photo onto the dashboard. Eudora's eyes landed on it immediately. The moment she saw Lillian's face, she let out a choked gasp. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the faded image, tracing the edges with care. "This can't be real," she whispered. "She was 7 when she disappeared. She never got older." Edgar exchanged a glance with Orion before turning back to her. "She did," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Whoever took her, they kept her alive. For years." Eudora shook her head, her breathing uneven. "No," she murmured. "They told us she was gone. They told us there was nothing more to find." Her voice cracked, and for the first time, Edgar saw something beyond grief in her eyes. Anger. They lied. He grabbed the photo, flipping it over again. The words, "Do you see now?" felt like a taunt. But Edgar knew what it really was. A challenge. Someone had been controlling the story for decades, and now, for the first time, they were slipping. Leaving clues. Leaving traces. And that meant something had changed. Something had forced their hand. He just had to figure out what. His hands tightened on the steering wheel as he turned the car back toward the station. He needed to run the photograph through the database. Check for any missing records. Find out who else had been erased from history. If there were more children, more cover-ups, then someone had been orchestrating this for years. And they were still out there, making sure the truth stayed buried. But this time, Edgar wasn't going to let that happen. As the city lights flickered in the distance, he exhaled slowly. Whoever had been watching him in the woods, whoever had erased the files, had made a mistake. They thought they could control the narrative. But they underestimated him. Edgar Holloway wasn't just looking for the truth anymore. He was hunting those who had buried it. The station was quiet when Edgar arrived, but the weight of what he carried made the silence feel heavier. The photograph of Lillian, older than she should have been, was burning a hole in his mind. He had uncovered proof that the past wasn't what it seemed. Someone had kept this secret buried for decades, but now it was surfacing. And whoever had left that message wanted him to keep going. Eudora sat stiffly in the chair across from his desk, the locket still clutched in her palm. "If she was alive," she whispered, "why didn't they tell us?" Her voice trembled with something between anger and sorrow. Edgar leaned forward, his eyes locked onto hers. "Because they didn't want you to know," he said. "And I'm going to find out why." He turned to his computer, fingers moving quickly over the keys. If Lillian had lived past 7, there had to be a trace of her somewhere. Minutes passed in tense silence as he scanned through old census records, school enrollments, hospital logs, anything that might place Lillian in the years after her disappearance. Then, suddenly, something flashed across the screen. Edgar's pulse quickened. A name. Buried deep in an old medical archive from the early 1960s. A patient admitted under a name that shouldn't have existed. His breath caught. Lillian Whitmore. Eudora shot up from her chair, gripping the edge of his desk. "No," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. Edgar's heart pounded. The document was brief, listing an admission date, a case number, but no discharge record. It was as if she had entered the hospital and then disappeared again. His gut twisted. "This isn't over," he murmured. "They took her once. And then they took her again." He printed the file and grabbed his coat. "We need to find this hospital," he said. "If there are records, they'll be there." Eudora wiped at her face and nodded. For the first time, there was something in her eyes besides grief. Determination. "Then let's go," she said firmly. Orion let out a sharp bark, already sensing that something big was coming. As Edgar stepped outside, he cast a glance at the street. The cold wind carried the scent of rain, and for a moment everything seemed still. Too still. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it, a car parked across the street, its engine running. The same car that had followed them earlier. His jaw tightened. They weren't just watching anymore. They were waiting. Edgar kept his eyes on the car across the street. The headlights were off, but the engine was still running, a silent reminder that someone was watching. Orion let out a low growl from the passenger seat, his sharp instincts picking up on the tension in the air. Edgar exhaled slowly, his fingers flexing near his holster. He had spent years tailing criminals, but tonight he was the one being hunted. Eudora shifted beside him, gripping her locket so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "They know," she whispered. "They know we found her name." Edgar didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened the car door slowly, stepping onto the pavement without taking his eyes off the vehicle. The moment he moved, the car's engine revved, but it didn't drive away. It just sat there, waiting, taunting him. He took a step forward, his pulse steady but his muscles tense. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the car lurched forward, tires screeching as it sped down the street. Edgar's heart pounded as he watched the taillights vanish into the night. He could chase them, but deep down, he knew it was pointless. They wanted him to know they were watching. They wanted him to be afraid. But fear wasn't going to stop him. He turned back to Eudora. "Get in," he said firmly. "We're going to that hospital." She hesitated for only a moment before nodding, her breath unsteady. As he pulled onto the road, he kept checking the mirrors, but the car was gone. Still, the feeling of being watched didn't fade. It clung to the air like a shadow, pressing against him with unseen weight. Whoever was behind this, they were close. The drive was silent, tension thick between them. Orion lay curled in the back seat, but his ears twitched at every slight noise. Edgar kept his hands steady on the wheel, his mind racing. If Lillian had been in that hospital, someone had hidden it. But why? And what had happened to her after that? His gut told him that the answers weren't going to be easy. And they weren't going to be safe. As they approached the old hospital's location, Eudora let out a sharp breath. Edgar followed her gaze, his stomach twisting. The building was gone. Where the hospital had once stood, there was nothing but an empty lot, overgrown with weeds and surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence. No records. No walls. Just an erased piece of history. And that meant one thing. Someone had destroyed it to keep the truth buried. Edgar stared at the empty lot, his jaw tightening. The hospital was gone. No crumbling walls, no remnants of an old foundation, just a patch of overgrown weeds where a building should have stood. It was as if it had never existed. But Edgar had seen the records. This place had been real. And someone had erased it. Completely. Eudora's breath hitched as she gripped the chain-link fence, her fingers trembling. "This isn't right," she murmured. "I remember this place. It was here." Her voice cracked as she scanned the lot, as if expecting the past to materialize before her. Orion whined beside her, pacing near the fence, his nose twitching at something unseen. Edgar swallowed hard. Someone had buried this part of history. And that meant the answers they needed were slipping away. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through public records, searching for any sign that this hospital had once stood here. Nothing. No demolition records, no old photographs, not even a mention in historical archives. It was like the building had never existed at all. His chest tightened. "They didn't just take Lillian," he muttered. "They took everything connected to her." Eudora turned to him, her eyes filled with something deeper than fear, realization. Her voice shook. If they erased the hospital, they could have erased her, too. Edgar exhaled slowly. That was exactly what he was afraid of. Someone had gone to extreme lengths to ensure that Lillian Whitmore was forgotten. But why? And who had the power to rewrite history like this? His gut told him the person watching them wasn't just a threat. They were part of something much bigger. Orion suddenly let out a sharp bark, his body tensing. Edgar's pulse quickened as he followed the dog's gaze toward the far end of the lot. A figure stood near the tree line. Distant, still, barely visible in the dim glow of the streetlights. Watching. Edgar felt a cold wave of déjà vu. It was just like before. The moment his eyes locked onto them, the figure turned and disappeared into the trees. Edgar's muscles coiled with tension. This wasn't over. If someone was still watching them, it meant they had missed something. Something the people behind this cover-up hadn't been able to erase. His grip tightened around the fence. They had one last chance to find the truth. And whoever was in those woods, they were about to lead him straight to it. Edgar didn't hesitate. Whoever that figure was, they had answers. He pushed open the rusted gate, its hinges groaning in protest, and stepped onto the abandoned lot. Orion was already ahead, his powerful legs moving swiftly, his nose to the ground. The dog had caught the scent. Edgar's heart pounded as he followed, his flashlight cutting through the darkness ahead. The truth was just beyond the trees. Eudora stayed by the fence, her voice shaking. "Be careful," she warned, but Edgar was already moving. The trees swallowed him whole, the night thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. Leaves crunched under his boots as he navigated the narrow path, the distant rustle of movement pulling him deeper. Orion stayed low, his tail stiff, a predator tracking something unseen. They weren't alone out here. Then, a noise. A sharp snap of a branch just ahead. Edgar stopped, his pulse hammering in his ears. Someone was there. He swept his flashlight forward, the beam landing on something that made his blood run cold. A structure. Hidden among the trees, barely visible under years of vines and rot, was what looked like a bunker. An old iron door, rusted but intact, stood slightly ajar. Someone had been inside. Recently. Orion whined, pawing at the ground as Edgar stepped closer. His gut told him this place wasn't abandoned. He gripped the edge of the door and pulled. The hinges groaned, revealing a gaping darkness within. The air that rushed out was stale, thick with dust and something else, something rotten. He hesitated for only a second before stepping inside. If Lillian had been erased, this place might hold the last proof of what had happened to her. His flashlight flickered against the damp concrete walls, illuminating old medical equipment, rusted and forgotten. An operating table, restraints still attached. Cabinets filled with decayed papers. This wasn't just a bunker. It had been something else. A place where people were kept. His stomach twisted. where children were kept. And then he saw it. A row of old patient files, covered in dust, lined up on a rusted shelf. His fingers trembled as he wiped one clean. The label sent ice through his veins. Lillian Whitmore. A cold wind howled through the trees behind him, but Edgar barely noticed. This was it. The proof they had been searching for. But before he could react, Orion let out a deep, warning growl. Something was moving behind him. Edgar turned sharply, his breath catching as he realized he wasn't alone in the bunker. Someone else was here. And they had just closed the door behind him. The iron door slammed shut, the sound echoing through the bunker like a gunshot. Orion barked furiously, his body tense, his claws scraping against the concrete floor. Edgar spun, his flashlight beam darting wildly across the room. The shadows seemed to shift around him, swallowing the weak light. Someone was here. Someone had locked him in. And that meant they didn't plan on letting him leave. A slow creak came from deeper inside. Edgar's pulse pounded as he turned toward the sound. A figure emerged from the darkness, stepping carefully over the debris. The man was old, his skin leathery, his gray hair thin, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. He wasn't surprised to see Edgar. He had been waiting for this. "You shouldn't have come here," the man murmured, his voice rough like gravel. "Some things are meant to stay buried." Edgar took a slow step forward, keeping Orion close. "Who are you?" His voice was steady, but his mind raced. The bunker, the erased records, the missing children, this man was part of it. The stranger exhaled, shaking his head. "You don't get it, do you?" He gestured toward the old files lining the wall. It was never just about Lillian. There were more. So many more. Edgar's stomach twisted. The town hadn't just ignored the disappearances. It had allowed them. The man sighed, almost regretful. "They let me do my work here. They let me take them." His expression darkened. And when it was over, they helped cover it up. His eyes locked onto Edgar's. "You should walk away now, officer. Before you disappear too." The words sent a chill through Edgar's spine. This wasn't just about an old crime. This was an entire system built to keep the truth hidden. But Edgar wasn't leaving without answers. His fingers tightened around his gun. "Where's Lillian?" The old man's face shifted into something unreadable, a mix of amusement and something else. "You already know," he said simply. "She never left." Orion growled, inching forward, sensing the tension in the air. Edgar's grip on his weapon remained firm. He had one chance. If he didn't get out now, he never would. A faint noise echoed from outside, distant, muffled. Edgar's heart jumped. Eudora! She was still out there. And she had no idea what was happening beneath her feet. He had to move fast. Because if this town had buried its secrets once, it wouldn't hesitate to do it again. Edgar's grip on his gun tightened. The old man's words echoed in his head. She never left. The bunker, the missing children, the erased records, it all led back to this moment. Orion snarled beside him, his muscles coiled, ready to strike. The man tilted his head, watching Edgar like a predator sizing up its prey. "You think you can stop this?" he murmured. "This town has survived on silence for decades. And you? You're just another loose end." Before the man could move, Edgar acted. A single, sharp command, "Go!" And Orion lunged. The dog struck fast, his powerful jaws clamping onto the man's arm, forcing him backward. Edgar didn't hesitate. He rushed forward, slamming the old man against the rusted metal shelf, sending dusty files crashing to the ground. This wasn't just about an arrest anymore. This was about survival. And Edgar wasn't going to be another buried secret. With the man struggling beneath Orion's weight, Edgar yanked the heavy door open, his heart pounding. The night air hit him like a wave, sharp and cold. And then, Eudora. She stood just beyond the fence, her eyes wide with fear. "Edgar." Her voice was desperate, trembling. "We have to go now." He turned back just as the old man let out a guttural laugh, blood trickling from his torn sleeve. "You have no idea what you've done," he rasped. "They'll never let you leave with the truth." Edgar didn't stay to listen. He ran. Orion released the man and bolted after him. His boots pounded against the dirt as he reached Eudora, grabbing her arm. "Get in the car." She hesitated for only a second before obeying, slamming the door shut behind her. Edgar threw the vehicle into gear, tires kicking up gravel as he sped away from the ruins of the past. Behind them, the bunker stood silent once more, but the truth could no longer be hidden. Eudora clutched the patient file in her lap, her breath unsteady. "What happens now?" she whispered. Edgar's hands were tight on the wheel. Now, the town had a choice. They could pretend nothing had happened. Or they could finally face what had been buried for so long. "We tell the world," he said. "No more silence." Orion let out a soft huff in agreement, his eyes still fixed on the road behind them. The past was catching up. But this time, it wouldn't be ignored. As they disappeared into the night, the town remained as it always had, quiet, still, untouched by time. But in the darkness, something had shifted. The truth, once buried, had clawed its way to the surface. And Edgar knew, someone would do anything to keep it from being revealed. Did you enjoy this story? Then leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more shocking mysteries. Turn on the so you don't miss anything and comment, "Mysteries never stay buried forever." What would you do in Edgar's place? Let us know in the comments.